Parashat Mishputim, which is Parashat Shavua, starts off with the words "Elah HaMishpatim Asher Tasim Lifneihem." These are the laws that you, Moses, shall place before them. Okay, place these laws before them. Very strange terminology. Place them before him. Teach it to them. Say it to them. Express it. What is this with place it before them? So Rashi explains to us this strange language of place it before him. Kishulchan aruch, like a prepared table. Wait, before we get into that Rashi, which is the second Rashi, let's deal with the first Rashi. The Rashi says ve'eleh. Whenever there's a vav, which means and in English, A-N-D, it's a connector. It connects to what was before it. Ma elu misinai, af elu misinai. Just like the 10 Devarim, 10 statements, were given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai, so too the laws that are going to be in this parsha, basically the civil laws, were given to Moshe at Har Sinai. Of course. What do you think? Moshe made them up? What are you coming to tell me? These are the same laws that these laws too were given at Har Sinai. First of all, we're in the midst of the Sinaitic experience. This is all what Moshe Rabbeinu comes down with the 10 tablets, with the 10 statements, 2 tablets. And then he expounds on what he did learn for 40 days up in heaven, where Hashem taught him the Torah and the mitzvahs, basically. And he came down and he expressed the mitzvahs. He taught the mitzvahs to Israel. So what do you have to tell me, Vav? It's connected to what happened at Har Sinai. Of course. Where else would Moshe Rabbeinu have gotten these laws from? So that's one question. The next question is this strange wording, Asher Tosim Lifneim, place it before them. Place it before them like a Shulchan Aruch, like a set table. What does Rashi say? Omar Moshe Rabbeinu said, Eshna lahem es haperek bezo gimel palmim at shetehei shegura befihem. I will teach them the laws once or twice or 2 or 3 times, actually, 2 or 3 times, until it's said in their mouth and until they understand it. I will give them the bottom line halacha. Put on tefillin, sit in a sukkah, wear tzitzis, do all these mitzvahs. I'll teach it to them 2 or 3 times until they know it. I will not bother and trouble myself to explain to him to explain to them the reasons and the understanding. The reasons and the understandings, I'm not going to tell them that. It's too much trouble. I'm not going to trouble myself. That's the way Rashi puts it. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to them, no. Asher Tosim Lifneim, place it before them like a set table with all the fragrance, with all the presentation, with all the reasoning, with all the understanding. Meaning Moshe Rabbeinu initially had a thought not to give us the understanding of the Mishpatim. Very strange. This Moshe Rabbeinu, we're talking about the great teacher of Torah to all of Israel. And here he is saying, I don't want to trouble myself to explain the reasoning for the mitzvahs. Does that make sense? Nada. You know what nada means? No, sir. No way. Doesn't make any sense. Now let's understand, first of all, what is Mishpatim? Elah HaMishpatim. These are the Mishpatim. What is a Mishpat? So the Rambam tells us that a Mishpat is a law that is logical. You know, there are certain laws, let's say, that are not logical. Basically, the ritual laws, not necessarily logical. But the Mishpatim are logical. Doesn't mean we would have known them by our own, but many of them we would have. Don't steal, don't cheat, don't lie. These are laws we would have known all on our own. Where civilization would have enacted these laws to protect itself. But the Mishpatim mean any law that has a reason, that you can understand the reason. So we're talking about laws that have reasons. Here is where Moshe Rabbeinu says, I'm not going to teach them the reason. I'm not going to teach them the explanation, the understanding. What is going on? You had his kasha? Excuse me?
It's a stira.
It's a stira. It's a contradiction. Here we are telling you these are the logical laws, and Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, I don't want to explain the logical.
But the answer is the logic is not our logic.
So, the Sfas Emes, the Gerer Rebbe, asked this question. How do we understand this? What kind of chutzpah is it to say that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to bother himself to explain the laws? So the Sfas Emes explains, what's the pshat? Moshe Rabbeinu said, we are servants of God. We are avodim, actually slaves to Hashem. He redeemed us from Egypt and acquired ownership over us, so to speak, and we are his servants. Does a servant ask the master, why are you telling me to do this? Master says, you know what, go into the bedroom and bring me my slippers. Does the slave say, hey, master, why do you want your slippers now? Maybe I should do it later. What's the reason? No. When a master tells a servant to do something, the servant does it. Said Moshe Rabbeinu to himself, the mitzvahs of the Torah are the mandates and commandments of the master of the universe. We don't ask why. We do not need to understand why. We just need to perform. A servant needs to perform without questioning the reasoning of the master. Says that's what Moshe Rabbeinu thought, that we are servants of Hashem. Therefore, he should not explain to us the reasons. He should just tell us the bottom line law, tell it to us 2 or 3 times. We understand the bottom line law. That is sufficient. Says the Sfas Emes, then why did Hashem say to place before them the reasoning? Is not Moshe Rabbeinu's argument or thoughts correct? Says the Sfas Emes that Hashem said, my people, the Jewish people, they said at the foot of Har Sinai, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will observe and we will then learn or hear. They accepted, God saying, my commandments unquestionably. And they didn't even know what they were yet, with any unconditional acceptance of my laws. As a result, I'm going to reward them and tell you, Moshe, to explain the reasons. Really, you are right that they don't need to understand the reasoning for the law, but I, Hashem, am telling you that because they said unconditional acceptance, they are rewarded, and you need to explain to them the reasons. That's the Sfas Emes.
So what does Chachma being a dot fit into?
He's not a Lubavitcher.
Okay.
Anyway, now we're back to another issue. How do we understand ostensibly pious people with all the presentation of being really frum, as we would say, pious, they only eat kosher, they don't even use the Erev, they do all kinds of chumras, they do all kinds of super duper adherence to mitzvahs, and then the next thing you know, you find out they're abusing children. You find out they're lying and stealing, and they're dishonest. How does this work? How do you present yourself as a pious person and do all of these extraordinary chumras, let's call it stringencies, and yet at the same time, you're dishonest? And unfortunately, almost weekly, I wouldn't say every week, but very often, we read about this in newspapers, on the internet, how esteemed people fall so far and disgrace our religion. How is this possible? I want to say it's not based on, but it's because of the same logic that the Sfas Emes advances. What is the Sfas Emes telling us? The reasons for the law, the spirit of the law, the understanding of the law, that's extraneous to the law. The bottom line is God commanded you do. Moshe Rabbeinu thought that's the bottom line and that's all you need. Says Hashem, I'm giving a gift to Israel and I'm going to let Moshe Rabbeinu, or I'm going to command Moshe Rabbeinu to explain the reasoning. So what do you have here? You have the bottom line of the law, and then you have the reasoning, which is a gift. The Rambam, we'll get back to this in a moment, but first we're going to divert with the Rambam. The Rambam in the Shmona Prakim The Rambam wrote 8 short little chapters as an introduction to Pirkei Avot, to the ethics of the fathers. It's called the Shmona Prakim because it's 8 chapters. In the 6th chapter, the Rambam says as follows: Omar HaPilosofim, the philosophers pose the following question: who is the greater person? Who has a higher caliber, a higher status? A person who struggles to do what's right? In other words, he has a temptation to do something wrong. He has a temptation to kill his mother-in-law, but he doesn't do it. He doesn't do it. He suppresses that temptation, and he lives in agony with his mother-in-law, or she comes off every so often. In other words, he does not fulfill and he does not succumb to the temptation. He stands strong and fast, and he does not sin. Bottom line, he does not sin, but that's a struggle for him. As opposed to another person who only wants to do what's right. He has no temptation, no struggle, naturally, or we should say, because of his, his character. He's not tempted to hurt anybody, to steal, to lie, to cheat, to do anything wrong. He only wants to do good. Say the philosophers, the person who is innately good and is not tempted to do something wrong is of a higher status and of a higher caliber than the person who has to struggle. Even though at the end of the struggle he does the right thing, he is not as good. He does not stand in the same madrega, in the same caliber as the person who is innately good. Says the Rambam, these are the philosophers. Probably Aristotle or people like that, who the Rambam is not quoting, but that's his source. Says the Rambam, the rabbis seem to disagree with this. Because we have a klal, we have a principle, l'fum tzara agra. The more pain, the more gain. The more you struggle to do something, the higher the reward. So you would think if the reward is higher, the person is greater, because Hashem's going to reward him for the struggle to overcome his temptation. And therefore, says the Rambam, at first blush, or we would say at first glance, the philosophers and the rabbis are in total disagreement. Then the Rambam says no. They agree with each other. It depends on the nature of the law. If it's ben odom la mokom, don't eat a cheeseburger, don't drive to the golf course on Shabbos, then what we should say is, I would love to eat that cheeseburger. I would love to drive to the golf course on Shabbos, but what can I do? The master of the universe has said, do not, and therefore I do not. So if I struggle with any ritualistic law, get up early in the morning, go to sleep, whatever I struggle with and it's ritualistic, then the Rambam says the harder the struggle, the greater the reward. But when it comes to interpersonal relations, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't commit adultery, these kind of things that are interpersonal, the philosophers are right. If you want to kill somebody, if you want to steal from somebody, if you want to lie and cheat, there's a defect in your personality. And a defect in your personality must be overcome. That is when the philosophers say the person who struggles, even though he overcomes, is less of a caliber than the person who initially has no inclination to do wrong. He has no inclination to hurt somebody. His character is pure. There's no defect in his character. He doesn't have to struggle with himself not to harm another person because he's inclined not to harm another person by dint of his personal character. That person is superior to the person who has to struggle to overcome temptations to harm another individual. Yes.
What about Shaul HaMelech?
Wait. Let me just finish this thought. We'll get to that question. So says the Rambam, there is no disagreement. Which means what? Which means that we, as Jews, as Orthodox Jews, as Torah Jews, we need to change our personality. eradicate from our personality any inclination to hurt somebody else. And we need to perfect our character. So understanding the Mishputim in the Rambam scheme of things is inherent to the mitzvah. It's part of the mitzvah. The spirit of the law and the understanding of the law and the rationale for the law is part of the mitzvah. That's what we need to internalize, because the Mishputim are the rational laws between man and man, and those laws need to be internalized so that we eradicate any inclination to do the wrong thing. So therefore, not like the Sfas Emes, understanding the law is not a gift separate from the law. It's integral. It's the essence of the law. Understanding the logic of the law between man and man is of the essence. How does this play out? What's the difference between these two approaches? I would suggest to you the difference is, how do we view the laws of Ben Adam L'Chavero? Do we view them like the tax code? There's a tax code. The tax code says pay taxes. Oh, there's a whole industry of trying to find loopholes in the tax law, because the tax law is imposed. It's not necessarily rational. As a matter of fact, it's irrational because it favors corporations, it favors the rich. It's all kinds of reasons why the tax code is not rational. We therefore look for loopholes. And there's a whole industry of lawyers and tax consultants seeking to find loopholes. If you view the mitzvahs of the Torah as being the command of God without any reason, without any logic, without any spirit to the law, hello? Hello? אני עכשיו באמצע שיעור. מחר. כן, טוב, תודה. Okay, so, what? No, that was to remind me about a doctor's appointment, which I have to cancel. But anyway, so now, okay, so according to the Sfas Emes, the rationale is a gift. It's not part of the essence of the law. The essence of the law is the bottom line. 2 or 3 times review it, know it, and perform. The logic, that's a gift from God, a side gift, not inherent to the law. According to the Rambam, the way I understand the Rambam is saying no. The spirit and understanding of the law is what you need to internalize. You need to make it so that you have no inclination to violate the law. You don't seek a loophole. You don't seek a workaround. You seek to expand the spirit of the law so that it perfects your character. Comes along the pious Jew. Does everything right. He views the Ben Adam L'Chavero, the laws between man and man, he views them as being like the tax code. If I can figure out a way around the law, if I can say, rationalize to myself that what I'm doing, I have some hook to hang my hat on, then I can do it. And that's why they violate the halacha. They ultimately do not give any credence to the spirit and the understanding of the law, because that's a gift. That's on the side. I got to just follow the basic law. I can find a workaround. I can find some way to circumvent it. Fine, I'm in good shape. They end up violating the law. But if you hold, like the Rambam, I think, saying that the spirit and the reasoning for the law is part of the law, you can't look for workarounds. You don't look to avoid it. You look to expand it and to develop your character. And that's the difference between my approach to this question and the Sfas Emes' approach. Mechilas Kvod Toraso, with all due respect to his greatness. So what I want to say is, that's what Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem, I don't have to teach them the law. I just have to teach it to them 2 or 3 times so they know it. Says Hashem to him, wrong. The reasoning, the understanding, the spirit of the law is part of the law. Therefore, set it out before them, Moses, like a set table. Give them the flavor of the law. Let them smell the food as it's being put on the table. Let them expand their understanding and let them elaborate on the essence and internalize not only the law, the basic law, but the rationale and the reasoning behind the law, the spirit of the law becomes part of the law. So that's how I would explain Rashi. Okay. That's the first part of today's lecture. If there are any questions, yes, you had a question. I'm sorry.
Yes, Shaul HaMelech.
What about him?
He had the Rachmanis. His character was good.
Okay. Kol hamarachim al ha'atzorim, l'sof hu's atzor al ha'rachamonim. In other words, don't substitute your thinking for God's thinking. When God says don't drive to shul on Shabbos, don't say, well, you know what?
We were speaking about Ben Adam Lapenurah.
Okay, or anything. If God Hashem tells you to do something, take Shlomo HaMelech.
Yeah.
Don't accumulate too much money. Don't accumulate too many horses. Don't have too many wives. Shlomo HaMelech found a rationale to avoid every one of those three, and he violated all three. What are the Gemara's? Ein etza ve'ein tavuna l'neged Hashem. Don't think you're smarter than God. Don't think you can find reasons to go avoid the application. Hashem knows, and He prohibits, and therefore you observe. That's exactly what I'm saying. Don't think you can outsmart God. Don't think you can be smarter than the Torah, and that applies both in Bein Adam L'Chavero and Bein Adam L'Makom.
I had similar experience in civil law. Many years ago, I took a motorcycle trip down the Blue Ridge Parkway.
A motorcycle? Wow.
Yeah, a lot of years ago. And I see a speed limit sign says 15 miles an hour. I was going like twice that speed until I hit the switchback. I said, oh, there's a reason for that. And then from that point on, it's like I didn't need to analyze it anymore.
Okay. So now I want to get to another matter completely. You know, and this is really, I developed this idea in the United States, and so maybe it applies to Israel or not. I would have to really think hard to see if it's really applicable to Israel. But let's take the United States, or let's take Europe, or let's take any place outside of Israel. Two Jews have a dispute. Where should they go to resolve that dispute? Should they go to a Beis Din, or should they go to a secular court? Well, you know what the rabbis say. If you go to a secular court, you're disgracing God's name. It's a chilul Hashem. Where does that come from? That comes from Parashat Mishputim. Rashi says, "Ve'ela hamishpatim asher tosim lifneihem, v'lo lifnei arkos shalako." Put the matter, the dispute, before a Beis Din, and do not put this dispute before a court of Akum. What does Akum stand for? Ayin, Avodas, Ayin, Kochavim, stars, Vav, and Mazolos. Don't go to a court of idolaters. Don't go to a court of another religion that will apply canon law, that will apply Shira law. Go to a Beis Din.
You got a Jewish lawyer.
What am I? Go to a Beis Din and let a Beis Din resolve that issue, but don't go to a court of idolaters. Says Rashi, why not? Because if you go to a court of idolaters, even if they apply the same law as a Jewish court, as the halacha, you are saying that this court of idolaters is superior to the court of Beis Din, which follows the Torah law. So even if they apply the same law as the Torah would apply, you are honoring an idol, you are honoring the court of idolaters, of idolatry, and therefore you're not allowed to go. Good. Now, if you take a look, say, for instance, in the Art Scroll, or other, I think it's the Art Scroll, but certainly in many modern Humashim, they say, you know what? It says, Avodas Kochavim U'Mazolos, idolatrous courts. It means any Gentile court, not idolatrous. Why do they say that? Because the censors used to go through Jewish texts, and whenever it would say Goyim, or make any reference to Christians, they would change it to idolaters. So they said, you know, this Rashi really should read Goyim, But they didn't want to say goyim because maybe who knows what. The censor made them change it to avodas kachavim mazolis, idolaters. Not true. Why is that not true? Because Rashi goes on to say that if you go to a court of idolaters, you're extolling and you're honoring idolatry. What happens then if you go to a court that is established in a kiyum of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach? So now the Ramban in Chumash, the Ramban in his commentary on the Chumash disagrees with the Rambam. You know, there are 7 Noahide laws. The last of the Noahide laws, let's call it the last because it's not a positive, it's a positive, not a negative. You know, the first do not kill, do not steal, do not commit cruelty, do not worship idols, do not blaspheme God's name, do not commit adultery. These are the part of the 7 Noahide laws. And the last one is establish courts, dinim, establish courts. The Rambam says the mitzvah, it's the mitzvah, the commandment to the nations of the world who have to observe the Noahide laws. Dinim means set up courts to enforce the other 6 Noahide laws. The Ramban says, no. Much more than that. It's not just to establish courts to impose and enforce the 6 Noahide laws. It's to set up a system of law that will govern civilization so that people are not tearing at each other's necks or heads. And therefore, there's an orderliness to civilization. Do dinim have laws of torts, have laws of contracts, have all kinds of laws, just like the Jews' code of civil law. The Goyim have to establish a code of civil law in order to order society. That is the command. So now let's get back to this court in France, in England, in the United States, whatever, where they're going to impose, or they have a set of rules, the laws of the land. In the United States, commercial transactions are governed by the Uniform Commercial Code, which has been adopted pretty much by every state except maybe Louisiana, which follows the French system. But basically, every businessman who makes a deal with another businessman, whether he be Jewish or Gentile, follows the provisions of the code. It has to be in writing, maybe. Doesn't have to be signed, but it has to be transmitted from one person to the other. There's all kinds of rules that govern civil transactions. That is a fulfillment of enacting a law that governs civilization, that governs society, that determines how you can formulate business transactions without killing each other. Okay? It's not akum.
Not Sunnim.
Nord Stream?
Catholics.
Well, they don't. It's not religious in the United States. It's not religious. In the United States, you know what it says on top of the court? In God we trust. You know what it says, at least relatively recently? Put your hand on the Bible and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. This is a fulfillment of the 7 Noahide laws, of the 7 laws.
You Europe, you put it on the Christian.
Okay, whatever, but you're not. It doesn't make a difference what Bible you're using. You're claiming it's because you're swearing to God. Okay, so it is something that is done in order to assure that you're not going to lie. Okay? But what is the point? The point is you're going to swear to tell the truth so that the law of the land can be applied. And the law of the land will govern the transaction. I'm going to put a question here now. Is that a court of Gentiles? Is that a court that if you go to that court, you're saying Christianity, the Christian courts are superior to the Jewish courts, the Muslim courts are superior to the Jewish courts? No. These are non-sectarian courts. They're set up by the government. The church has no input. The priests do not determine the law. The legislature of the United States, the legislature of Europe, maybe, let's talk about the United States. The legislatures of the United States, some federal laws, some state laws. This is not done by the church. This is not done by any avodah zarah. Even if Christianity is avodah zarah, the Christian faith has no input into the civil laws of the United States. Now, that law is adopted in order to order society. Wouldn't the Ramban say that that law that's enacted in order to order society is a kiyum, is a fulfillment of the obligation of dinim, of obligation to set up orderly rules that will govern society. That's what that law is. Now let's take a look at the various transactions. You bought your house. You bought your apartment here in Israel. You signed a contract. Does that contract have two kosher witnesses? Did you make sure it was two kosher witnesses? Did you make sure that the contract document was formulated in accordance with the laws of contracts under halacha? Or did you use a form? And in the United States, you use a form that's prepared by the real estate brokers. Every state has a licensing of brokers, and the agency that formulates the brokerage agreements prepares a form that is used in 99% of the purchases of apartments or homes. And you use that form because everybody's familiar with that form. And every single real estate company uses the same form. Okay, you have an area where you can add details. It includes the ceiling fans. It doesn't include that, whatever it is you want to include. But the basic formula of the contract is established by the brokerage licensing bureau. That's not a kosher star. That's not a kosher contract. There are no kosher witnesses. And you signed this contract. You didn't make a kinyan. You didn't make an act of acquisition that the halacha mandates. Okay, fine. You signed the contract. Now you're going to come and you're going to get a deed. You're going to pay and you're going to get a deed. The deed has two kosher witnesses? The deed doesn't have two kosher witnesses. The deed's recorded in the land records. The land records is not the tabu. That's nothing to do with Judaism. That's not a halacha. So you bought your house, you signed, you get your deed, totally outside of the framework of halacha. Okay, that's one issue. Second, God forbid you're involved in a car accident with another Jew. Well, you tell him, you crashed into me, I'm taking you to Beis Din. What happens in the normal case? You get a lawyer. The lawyer will then either make a demand or actually sue the person who caused the accident. What happens then? The insurance company of the person who caused the accident steps in and defends the person that caused the accident. First of all, they try to minimize the damages. Second of all, they try to find all kinds of reasons why he may not be absolutely liable. You tell the insurance company, hold on a moment, I want to go to Beis Din. You know what they'll say to you? Beautiful. Go to Beis Din, no coverage. You want to go to Beis Din? Covered gadol. You know what that means? With great honor. We'd love to see you go to Beis Din because that will be a violation of your insurance contract. We will provide no coverage. We're off the hook. Go for it. Nobody does that. Everybody relies on the insurance company. So in civil tort cases, insurance companies step in and take over the process. Nobody goes to Beis Din. Okay. Somebody steals from you. Oh, I'm going to take him to Beis Din. I want to get kfel. I want to get double the amount. I want to get whatever the Beis Din will order. You know what happens? The state steps in, arrests the criminal, takes him off to jail or makes him post a bond, except if he lives in New York. And now what happens is it's totally out of your purview. You have no control over the case. For instance, the victim of the thief of the robbery says, you know what? The guy who stole from me is Jewish. I feel sorry for him. Drop the charges. The state says it's not your decision to drop the charges. The state's attorney is going to prosecute. You're going to be summoned, Mr. Victim, as a witness. You're going to be put under oath, and you're going to have to testify as to what happened. You can't tell us to drop the charges. We're not going to let this guy go free. He'll rob somebody else. We need to protect society. You have no control over the case. I want to go to Beis Din. Tell it to your mother-in-law. Nobody's going to listen. You want to go to Beis Din. There's no Beis Din in criminal cases. Another case. I am a manufacturer of men's suits, ladies' suits, whatever it is, chairs, tables, whatever it is. I have somebody who, I don't run around to 100 stores to try to sell my goods that I'm going to manufacture. I have a wholesaler. A wholesaler comes along, let's say it's suits. I'm manufacturing suits or dresses. A wholesaler engages, or I, the retailer, find a designer who tells me, listen, next year, I'm going to go out now and sell next spring's clothing. I'm going to have samples made. I'm going to go into the retailer. I'm going to show him, look, you can buy this style, that style, 5 other styles, this color, this size, that size. Tell me how many of each you want. And the retailer picks what he wants from the samples that's presented to him by the wholesaler. Then the wholesaler goes to the manufacturer and he says, hey, Mr. Smith, the retailer, he wants 5 suits, 2 double-breasted, 3 this way, this color, this size, that size. Manufacturer says, great. I'm not going to make these suits for that retailer because maybe he'll go bankrupt and I won't get paid. There's only one thing you can do. Assure me that I'm going to get paid, and then I'll make this line of clothing that he's going to get next spring to sell. The retailer says, I'm not paying in advance. What happens if the manufacturer goes bankrupt? What do? The retailer goes to his bank and he gets a letter of credit. The letter of credit says, if within 90 days of delivery of the goods by the manufacturer to the retailer doesn't pay, you can draw against this irrevocable letter of credit and the bank will pay you. The bank will then take the retailer's house as collateral or other things as collateral, but the bank will guarantee to the manufacturer that it'll get paid within 90 days of delivering the goods. So everybody's safe now. The retailer has not paid anything yet. The manufacturer has no risk because within 90 days of his manufacture, he gets paid. Now there's a breach of contract somewhere along the line. Let's go to Besdin. Besdin will say that the suits did not exist. That's called a davar shelo bo la'olam. Something that doesn't exist in the world today. Something that doesn't exist to the world today, you can't make a deal over it. There's no such thing as enforcing a contract on a davar shelo bo la'olam. Then he's going to say, wait a second, besides the problem that it's a davar shelo bo la'olam, it doesn't exist. You can't buy something that doesn't exist. You can't commit to something that doesn't exist. Did you make a kinyan? Was there a kinyan? I mean, an act of acquisition or sale between the manufacturer and the wholesaler? They never met. The retailer and the manufacturer, they never met. The wholesaler is the metaveach. He's in between. He commits to this, but he doesn't make a kinyan. Nobody made a kinyan. There's no kinyan, there's no deal. You try that out in the land now where a guy orders a suits and somebody reneges and somebody says, let's go to Besdin, they'll hit him over the head. Nobody goes to Besdin. Why? Because the Besdin has no tools to enforce these kind of situations because the halacha is based on what happened hundreds of years ago. Says the Ramah, the great posek of the Ashkenazi community, in the Shulchan Aruch, in his glosses in the Shulchan Aruch, the law of the land is the law in all monetary matters. What does that mean? That means look to the law of the land. Don't look to the Choshen Mishpat. The Ramah was already at the point where things were beginning to develop. There was international trade was beginning to flourish. Insurance was coming on the market. These were things that were developing in the Ramah's age, and he saw that the global economy cannot, the Shulchan Aruch and its ways of making kinyonim when one lives in Spain, one lives in France, they're not going to see each other, not going to make a kinyan. It's impossible to follow the Shulchan Aruch, basically the Choshen Mishpat, and therefore you follow the law of the land. Custom and usage becomes what you do. If this is how the marketplace deals with this issue, the marketplace becomes the law of the land becomes the halacha. Now, what? Divorce is a separate issue. Well, we can talk about divorce too, but okay, I can talk about divorce. But let's first see what the Ramah is saying, that in monetary matters, we follow the law of the land. You know what the Taz and the Bach and all the side commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch say, what kind of words is those from the Ramah? If we follow the Ramah, we close the Shulchan Aruch and we got to learn the codes of the various countries. And they disagree vehemently with the Ramah, but the Ramah was greater than all of them, and he foresaw this tremendous development of national, international trade, and he understood that you can't make a kinyan, you can't worry about davar shalom olam. These kind of things are not going to work in the mercantile system of today, of his day, for sure not of today. So you want to talk about divorce. So since I'm controversial, I'll talk about divorce. Many years ago in Baltimore, there was a movement to set up a citywide Beis Din that should have jurisdiction on all kinds of issues of disputes between Jews. Now, most everybody knew that if it was a car accident, you went to the insurance company. If it was a criminal matter, the state took over. All the things that we discussed before. But basically, on personal matters between Jew and Jew, for instance, divorce, there should be one central Beis Din that decides all these issues. Now, let me tell you what happens in a process of divorce in a Beis Din. The Beis Din wants to produce a divorce for the woman, because the worst thing that a Beis Din can have a reputation of is being inept and being incapable of producing a get for a woman. Everybody starts screaming, the halach is terrible. Yeah, you're going back to where women are slaves and they have no rights and they have no this, and it's terrible. Therefore, the Beis Din, in order to uphold the honor of the Beis Din, wants to produce a get for the wife, but they have no power. So what do? They tell the wife, give up your interest in the house. Let the husband have custody. Let this happen. Let that happen. Give the money in the bank accounts to your husband, because they want the husband to give a get. So they're in a sense bribing the husband in order to produce a get, so they, the Beis Din, maintain their honor. Their honor comes at the cost of raping the women. And that's what happens in a Beis Din. So Kowalsky, who lived in Baltimore, would tell the women who called me, because I was on the committee of setting up the rules, and I resigned before they finished the final draft because I didn't want to be associated with what the Beis Din was doing. I said as follows: when a woman comes to the Beis Din, it's way down the line. The last thing she does is go to a Beis Din. Maybe she'll go to her rabbi, but she won't come to Beis Din. Why? Because she knows that Beis Din is impotent, and ultimately Beis Din will want to produce a get, and ultimately Beis Din will rape her of her rights. So what does she do? She goes to Beis Din as a last resort. So what I said as follows: the Beis Din in Baltimore should set up a committee composed of a social worker, a psychologist, maybe even a psychiatrist, someone who practices family social issues, and that committee should meet with the husband and the wife and determine if this marriage is salvageable or not. Has it gotten to the point where they hate each other so much, or they resent each other so much, that the marriage is not salvageable and they need to get a divorce, a get? That committee should report back to the Beis Din. This marriage is salvageable, then the Beis Din should say, okay, keep working on resolving the issues. Or the marriage is insolvable and they cannot be resolved, bring the case to Beis Din. What is the first step that the Beis Din should do? The Beis Din should adjudicate property rights. Don't talk about a get. We are now going to adjudicate the rights of the woman to property, or the rights of the husband to property. The next step was we're going to adjudicate custody, and we're going to follow what's in the best interests of the children. You know what the halacha is on custody? If the child is 6 years old, we favor the husband. If the child is under 6 years old, we favor the wife. Unless it's a woman, it's a girl, whatever, then there's some leniency in what to do. But basically, the halacha sets out what to do based on, men will raise the boys properly, women will raise the girls properly, and we don't want to mix the two, and therefore we separate the children. Now today, that doesn't work. You don't separate the children. You do everything possible to keep the children intact. So I said Bezdin should resolve the issues of custody. Secondly. Thirdly, after property and custody is resolved, then deal with the get itself, because now the husband has no leverage to rape the wife because property has already been resolved. Custody has already been resolved. What's left? Ordering the husband to give a get. He has no leverage, and he can't compel the wife to take a get, or she can't compel him to give a get, unless they have some kind of understanding which the Bezdin can impose. But nobody is going to have a leg up in that kind of a dispute. That's what I told the Bezdin. Kowalsky, no Bezdin in the world does that. We're not doing it. Don't do it. Then came the issue of whether this Bezdin would be accepted community-wise. In other words, a Bezdin cannot be established by fiat of the rabbis. The Shulchan Aruch says, if you want this Bezdin to have the power of a city Bezdin, the Zion Tuvei Ha'ir, the members of the council of the city, the Jewish council, have to adopt this Bezdin as the Bezdin of the city. So now I said today, we don't have a council. In Europe they did, but here we don't. So what are you going to do? You're going to go to every Orthodox shul, and you're going to tell the Orthodox shul, adopt this as a citywide Bezdin. Guess what's going to happen when you try that? I'm going to go to every single shul. I'm going to ask to speak to the board, and I'm going to tell them, don't you dare adopt this Bezdin, because they're going to screw women. Excuse my French. So therefore, I'm going to fight you from shul to shul to shul. And then what happened is they abandoned that effort, because they knew if I would go to every shul, I'm fairly, coherent, and I'm a lawyer, so I know how to argue properly, they will lose. So they abandoned that project. That's what happens by divorce. Okay, so now we get back to the issue.
Does Jerusalem have a city?
No, Jerusalem has about 100 million, but they did.
New York State, don't they?
Well, New York State had a get law. They had a get law, which if you ever followed that, the rabbis denounced it and said it's not valid. If you go to a secular court, what does the secular court do? Say you must go and get a get. You can't, and if you don't do that, the secular court will take away your assets, it'll take away your driving license, whatever it'll do. Say the rabbis, that is a get mu'usa. That is a forced get, and it's not valid, and therefore they don't do it. But the YU rabbis disagree and say, no, you're making a choice. Do you want your driver's license, or you want to screw your wife? Mess her up. So they say that's a good law. But there's a big debate over whether it is or not. And you know what the result is? If it's not a good get and she marries somebody else, besides the violation of halacha, the children will be mamzerim. It's a big issue. So anyway, back to our case. So now I pose the question. Is it better to go to a Bezdin that doesn't know insurance law? Is it better to go to a Bezdin that doesn't know transactional law? Is it better to go to a Bezdin that doesn't know criminal law of the land? Is it better to go to that Bezdin because, we must go to a Jewish Bezdin? Or is it better to go to a Bezdin that says, in God we trust, and it's secular, it's not religious whatsoever, no religious input? Is it better to go to that court that has what we would call case law, that defines the relationships between people? Hundreds and hundreds of cases, which are all recorded. The arguments, the final, bottom line judgments. That is a developed body of law.
We have court law.
We have court law. We have the body of developed law. Or is it better to go to a Bezdin, which employs what we would call in Yiddish, Beichsvara? You know what a Beichsvara is? My gut feeling. I'm a rabbi on a Bezdin. My gut feeling is, in this case, that you should have to honor the mortgage. So, my name was on the rules because I wanted to stay on the rules to warn people about this Bezdin. So anyway, one day, one of the dayanim of the court calls me up. He says, Avrum Moshe, that's my name. He knew me well. I knew him well. What's a wrap mortgage? That was his question. The case before him was it was a wrap mortgage. They didn't go to court. They went to Besdin. He said, I'm going to tell you in a minute. He says to me, I haven't the slightest idea what a wrap mortgage is. Can you explain it to me? I said, are you crazy? If you don't know what a wrap mortgage is, you say it in the courtroom in front of the two Balei Dinim. And then they will produce an expert who will tell you what a wrap mortgage is. And then if that expert makes a mistake or one side feels he didn't do it right, they can argue and tell and refine it. But if you ask me and I give you wrong information, nobody will even know. You won't even ask what's a wrap mortgage to the people that are in the case. I'll tell you what a wrap mortgage is. Maybe I'm wrong. Nobody will know. You can't ask me outside the purview of the people. That's another defect of the Besdin system. They don't admit that they don't know what it is, because God forbid a rabbi should admit that he doesn't know something. Okay, so therefore he asked me what a wrap mortgage is. A wrap mortgage is, let's say, I buy a house and I can't afford to pay for the whole purchase price, so I go to a bank and I get a mortgage. And the mortgage the mortgage company or the bank pays the owner, and the owner walks away, he's paid in full. I pay the mortgage company every month a certain amount of money until I pay off the loan. Now, what happens if I have a mortgage that's, say, 3%? It's an old mortgage, I got a 3% mortgage. Comes along a buyer who wants to buy this house and says to the seller, don't pay off your mortgage because I like the 3%. I'll assume that obligation. And I'll pay the bank. And of course, I'm going to have to pay you more than your old mortgage because you make a profit. I'll wrap my mortgage around that mortgage. I'll give you a second mortgage, which will wrap around the first mortgage. The first mortgage will stay in place. I will pay the bank. You will have nothing to worry about if you believe that or not, whatever. You'll have nothing to worry about. I'll pay you the first mortgage, and I'll pay you a second mortgage. I'll pay you extra. That's a wrap mortgage.
Is that the same as an assumed mortgage?
An assumed mortgage means there's no mortgage behind it. This is where let's say the house originally sold for $100,000. The house sold for $100,000. I paid $50,000 down. I have a $50,000 mortgage at 3%. Along comes me. I want to sell it to you. I'll sell it to you for $200,000. You'll say, listen here, let's keep the original mortgage in place. At least the first $50,000, I'll pay 3%. The next 150, I'll put up 50. I'll have a second mortgage for 100,000 at 7%. So I'll pay both mortgages, but don't terminate the first mortgage because I want the benefit of that 3%. That's a wrap mortgage. So this rabbi calls me up and wants me to explain what a wrap mortgage is. I said, I'm not going to explain it to you. Go back to the Besdin, sit in the case, and tell the parties you don't know what a wrap mortgage is. You want an expert to come and testify as to what's a wrap mortgage. You want to summons me? I'll be happy to come. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. But at least everybody will hear what I say. If I tell it to you privately and I make a mistake, nobody will know. And you'll go on your merry way thinking this is what it is, and you'll be wrong. Because I was wrong. So that's another problem that we have with Batei Dinim. Okay, but anyway, back to my question.
Excuse me.
You have to leave?
Yeah.
Okay, have a good day. Back to my question. Is going to a secular court that has all kinds of case law, that understands what wrap mortgages are, that understands what all these other transactions are about, manufacturers, what happens is manufacturer makes the suits in the case that I gave before, and he puts it on a train and he pays the freight. And the train is now on its way to the retailer. Guess what happens? The train gets derailed. Who's at fault? The manufacturer says, listen, I did whatever I could do. I sent it out to you. The retailer says, I didn't come. What do you do? Who is the train? Who is the train? Is the train an agent of the seller, or is the train the agent of the buyer? Well, we can argue about that till hell freezes over, or we can look in the UCC and see what it says about freight on board or not freight on board, and that determines whose risk the transportation is. You can't look that up in the Shulchan Aruch. You're going to say the train is an agent of the seller? Ein shlichus la'akum. A Gentile can't be an agent. What are you going to do? I'm trying to tell you that if you go to a Bezdin, the Bezdin has no tools, no laws, no Shulchan Aruch on which to base their decision. They have to try to balance what they call the equities, which I call a Beitzvara. They're going to try to figure out who's right and who's wrong in some way. But they don't have a clear way of determining it. And they don't have a halachic way of determining it. And therefore the question becomes, why should I go to such a Beis Din when I can go to a secular court that is not religious in nature, that understands the transaction 100 times better than the Beis Din, that has case law and legislative law that determines the rights of the parties, which, by the way, we all relied upon when we entered into the deal.
Could you go to both courts?
You can't go to both courts. Because, first of all, what happens if they give it contradictory decisions? What are you going to do? Pull out your hair? I mean, so the point is, I ended off this article in my second book, Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu. I want greater people than me to teach me what is wrong with going to a secular court. Remember, the Isser, the prohibition is to go to a religious court, a Gentile religious court. Nothing is mentioned in the halach about secular courts because they didn't exist. In the days of Rashi, there was only canon courts, there was only Shrira courts, there was no court like the court system of the United States. What do you do? Second of all, the basis of the halacha, the law is way ahead of the halacha. Faxes, emails, letters of credit, all kinds of issues that the Shulchan Aruch never contemplated. And as the Ramah said, Dina de Malchusa Dina. What's wrong with going to a court of Dina de Malchusa Dina?
Only for post condition.
Question mark, end of my article.
Post condition.